I remember the exact moment I started doubting myself. Morgan sat across from me at our favorite coffee spot, twirling her latte straw like she owned the conversation. Kara, I just, I think you're holding on to him for the wrong reasons, she said softly, eyes full of concern. Ethan's been distant. He's not invested the way you deserve. You deserve better. I swallowed hard, my chest tightening. I wanted to trust her. Morgan had been my best friend since high school, the one person who always seemed to see things I didn't. And yet, her words planted this seed, tiny but insistent, that maybe I had been blind, maybe I had been naive. I don't know, I murmured, staring at the frothy swirl in my cup. Morgan leaned closer, her voice gentle but persuasive. Sometimes, ending it before it gets messy is the only way to protect yourself. I know it hurts, but you'll thank me later. The thought that she could be right rattled me more than I wanted to admit. I wanted to fight it, to tell her I trusted Ethan, that he wasn't like that. But Morgan had this way of making her certainty feel like fact. And for the first time, I wondered if I was the problem. So I followed her advice. I sent Ethan a message, careful, polite, trying to sound composed, while my stomach twisted in knots. I convinced myself it was the right choice, that I was doing the mature thing. It wasn't until later, when things started to unravel, that I realized the truth. Morgan hadn't been protecting me. She hadn't been worried about my feelings or my heart. She had been guiding me toward the exact outcome that suited her. And by then, it was already too late. The days after the breakup blurred together, like I was moving through something half real. Morgan stayed close, closer than before. Her text came in consistently, always checking in, always asking how I was coping. "You're handling this better than I thought," she said once, like she was studying me instead of comforting me. I told myself she meant well, but something in her tone never fully sat right. And every time I tried reaching out to Ethan, I got the same result. Distance. Delayed replies. Short answers. A strange emotional absence that felt almost like relief. Morgan didn't just stay present. She positioned herself everywhere. The coffee shop we used to go to, the bookstore I liked to disappear into, even group hangouts that used to feel random started feeling coordinated. She'd appear mid-conversation, slide in naturally, laugh at the right moments, pick up threads before they fully formed, and always, somehow, Ethan was part of those same threads. At first, I told myself it was a coincidence, that I was looking too closely. Morgan was my best friend. She had always been the one who noticed things I didn't. But the pattern didn't fade. It sharpened. Shared jokes I wasn't part of. Plans that seemed to exist before I ever heard about them. The smallest overlaps that didn't feel wrong individually, but together started forming something uncomfortable. Still, I resisted the thought. I kept questioning myself instead. Am I overreacting? Am I just hurt and looking for meaning where there isn't any? Each time I noticed something off, I dismissed it. Morgan wouldn't do that. Not her. And yet the doubt didn't leave, it just settled deeper, quieter, harder to ignore. Then came the first crack. Ethan had left his laptop at my apartment after a weekend visit. I wasn't trying to invade anything. I told myself I was just closing tabs, just returning it. But when I opened the browser, a shared calendar notification appeared. 2 names, Ethan and Morgan. I stared at it longer than I should have. Events filled months ahead, coffee meetups, brunches, movie nights, cleanly scheduled, familiar, planned. While I had been under the impression that those moments were either spontaneous or meant for me, something in me went still. When I confronted him, I kept my voice controlled. Careful. "What is this?" I asked. Ethan barely looked at it. He hesitated just long enough to feel rehearsed, then shrugged it off. "It's nothing. Morgan was just helping me organize some work stuff." The explanation should have settled me. It didn't. But I didn't push further. I wanted it to be simple. I wanted to believe him more than I wanted to understand what I'd seen. That same night, Morgan texted me. "See? I'm just looking out for you. He's confused. You're strong. You'll get through this." The message should have reassured me. Instead, it landed like something carefully placed, not spoken. I couldn't prove anything. I couldn't even fully explain the feeling building in my chest. But from that point forward, every interaction with her started shifting shape. What once felt like support now felt directional. Every gentle suggestion, every well-timed opinion about Ethan, every moment she steered me toward doubt instead of clarity, it all started to look less accidental. And that realization didn't just confuse me, it unsettled me in a way I couldn't shake. Because if I was right, then I hadn't been losing him slowly. I had been guided out of it. I tried reaching out to other friends, but the response was already waiting for me. Pre-shaped. You're overthinking. You've been stressed. Morgan's just trying to help. The same words echoed back at me like they had been agreed on before I ever spoke. That's when it shifted. Not angry yet, something quieter. Focused. Because in the silence that followed, one thought finally formed clearly enough to stay. If this had been arranged, then I needed to understand how. And I wasn't going to ask twice. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Morgan's smile, her perfectly timed concern, and the calendar dates I'd stumbled across. Something inside me snapped. Not rage yet, just a cold, methodical realization. I needed proof. Hard evidence. Not just feelings or suspicions. Because if I wanted to survive this, I couldn't rely on memory or gut instinct. Morgan was clever. She'd left nothing obvious. I would have to dig. The first thing I did was go back to Ethan's apartment under the guise of returning some books. I had to be casual, careful, nothing that would alert either of them. My hands shook as I picked up his discarded mail, his notebooks, and small drawers I'd never thought to open. And then I saw it. A plain envelope, shoved behind a stack of papers, marked with my name and a small heart I recognized from Morgan's handwriting. I ripped it open. Inside were 2 tickets to a concert months ago. Tickets I had no idea existed. There was also a folded note, the kind Morgan always wrote in perfect cursive, with phrases that had once seemed harmless. Can't wait to see you tonight, it's going to be perfect. And don't worry about her. She'll understand eventually. My stomach twisted. My hands were shaking, but not from fear, from a clarity that cut through the fog I'd been drowning in. It wasn't just one note. There were more. Brunch plans, weekend trips, even a small gift receipt for something Ethan had never mentioned. Every piece of evidence was a small dagger, each one confirming what I had refused to see. Morgan hadn't just encouraged me to break up with him. She had been actively building her own private world with him, while I was blind, trusting her completely. I confronted Ethan again, more aggressively this time. Why didn't you tell me about this? I demanded, holding the envelope like proof I couldn't yet fully voice. He looked cornered, like a kid caught sneaking out of the house. Kara, it wasn't what it looked like. She was just helping me figure things out. But his eyes betrayed him, darting away, and I knew immediately that words were worthless here. Proof mattered. That night, I went home and started cataloging everything. Screenshots of texts, photos of gifts, even the handwriting on notes. Everything would have a place. I created a folder called Evidence on my laptop. I haven't touched social media yet. I didn't confront Morgan. Not now. I had to be surgical. I also started paying closer attention to Morgan's behavior. Every time she checked in or offered advice, I noted the timing and tone. Everything lined up. Every word, every seemingly innocent suggestion she made over the past months had been a calculated step, designed to push me out of Ethan's life and into her own. By the end of the week, I had more than enough to start building a case, emotionally, socially, even legally if I had to. And yet, I held back. There was a thrill in waiting, in knowing that Morgan thought she was untouchable, that she believed she had won. The more she flaunted her closeness with Ethan, the more her confidence grew, and the more I knew the fall would be spectacular when it came. For the first time since the breakup, I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks: control. Quiet, patient, and precise. Morgan had underestimated me, counting on my trust and my hesitation. And that mistake, that arrogance, was going to be her undoing. The deeper I went, the harder it became to ignore what I was seeing. Every message, every overlooked receipt, every small detail from Ethan's apartment stopped feeling random. It wasn't a collection anymore. It was structure. Something built. Something intentional. And I was starting to see the shape of it closing in around me. The breaking point came by accident. Ethan had left his phone next to me while I reached for a book. A notification lit the screen, and I saw her name. Morgan. At first, it looked harmless. Then I saw more. Messages stacked in sequence, timed conversations, private jokes, plans made in advance. The kind of familiarity that doesn't develop by chance. My fingers went still before my thoughts caught up. One line stayed with me. Can't wait to see you later. I thought about you all day. Wish she'd understand. That she was me. Something in me locked. Not panic, clarity, sharp and immediate. I didn't interrupt. I didn't react. I just kept scrolling. The pattern unfolded quickly after that. Photos of them together I was never told about. Coffee dates are framed as a coincidence. Movie nights that overlapped neatly with times I was kept waiting or rescheduled. Everything I had dismissed as timing started to look arranged. Then came the receipts, the small confirmations that made it undeniable. Tickets, gifts, messages layered with familiarity that didn't belong to a casual friendship. It all aligned too cleanly, too consistently. This wasn't confusion or overlap, it was coordination. And I wasn't just being excluded from it, I was being guided out of it. The realization didn't hit like a shock. It settled like pressure. Slow, suffocating, controlled. Morgan hadn't reacted to my breakup. She had shaped it. That night, I confronted Ethan. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I simply placed one of the notes in front of him and waited. His expression changed before he spoke. The confidence drained first, then the ease he always carried, as it had never belonged to him in the first place. Kara, it's not what it looks like, he said. But his explanation didn't land. Not even close. Silence filled the space where denial should have worked. And that was enough. Morgan, meanwhile, continued exactly as before. You're stronger than you think. You'll get through this. The message should have sounded supportive. Now it felt rehearsed, like something sent from a distance. Not concern, but direction. I could almost picture her reading it back to herself, satisfied that everything was still on track. What she didn't know was that the track had already changed direction. From that moment, I stopped reacting and started recording. Every message, every image, every timestamp became part of a structure I was building quietly in the background. Not scattered pieces anymore. An archive. Controlled. Indexed. Ready. Emotion stopped leading. Precision took over. And for the first time, I could see the full scale of what Morgan had built. Not just a betrayal, but a system designed around my trust, my assumptions, my silence. The difference now was simple. She still believed she was shaping the outcome. I was already documenting it. By the end of the week, something settled in me. Cold, steady, unmistakable. Morgan had mistaken patience for passivity. And when someone makes that mistake about you, they don't realize they've already lost the advantage. Not in words, not in confrontation, but in time. Morgan didn't wait for me to act. She started her campaign quietly but deliberately. Mutual friends, work acquaintances, even casual contacts in our social circle began hearing her version of the story. Kara's being dramatic. She's paranoid. Honestly, I don't think she even realizes what she's doing to herself. Every word was calculated to isolate me before I could expose her. At first, I tried to brush it off. I told myself, people exaggerate, rumors fade, but the more I paid attention, the more I saw the pattern. Invitations stopped coming, messages slowed, and subtle glances at gatherings carried judgment I hadn't earned. Morgan's words had planted seeds that were now sprouting into social thorns. I realized then that the stakes had escalated. It wasn't just my heart or my trust anymore. It was my reputation, my friendships, and my professional credibility. One misstep, and her narrative would stick. I couldn't confront her publicly yet. It would look desperate. I had to act quietly, strategically, like a chess player positioning pieces before the final strike. I reached out to a lawyer I had consulted briefly years ago, about unrelated issues. I didn't tell her it was about Morgan. I simply asked about documentation, evidence, and protection against defamation. Even sitting in that office, I felt a strange mix of fear and control. The lawyer's blunt advice was sobering. If she's trying to ruin your reputation, you have to move before she escalates. Timing is everything. I spent nights cataloging everything again, this time with the lawyer in mind. Screenshots, photos, notes, text timestamps. Every message from Morgan to Ethan, every plan, every subtle manipulation was cross-referenced. I labeled the evidence in a way that, when revealed, would leave no room for her lies, and I watched her carefully. Every public smile, every concerned message she sent to mutual friends, I noted. The more she flaunted her closeness with Ethan, the more her overconfidence became apparent. She didn't realize that every move she made was being silently recorded, every word cataloged. Her empire of subtle control was brittle. By the end of the week, I had a clear strategy forming. The exposure would be precise, legal, and devastating. Morgan thought she was untouchable, that she had manipulated me into silence, that she had the narrative under her thumb. But the truth, carefully documented and patiently timed, would strip her of every ounce of social power she'd built while pretending to be my best friend. For the first time in weeks, I smiled, not triumphantly, not yet, but with a quiet, simmering certainty. Morgan had underestimated me, and she was about to learn, in the cruelest but most controlled way, exactly what happens when someone you betray stops trusting you, stops crying, and starts planning. By the time the weekend arrived, I had shifted from reaction to calculation. I wasn't just cataloging evidence anymore. I was positioning myself. Every text I sent, every comment in group chats, every appearance at casual meetups was deliberate. Nothing flashy, nothing confrontational, just subtle cues, glimpses of strength, quiet confidence that reminded people who I really was. Ethan, meanwhile, started showing cracks. He called less frequently, but when he did, his voice carried tension, a hesitation I hadn't heard before. Morgan, in her overconfidence, had begun to take liberties, subtle boasts, flirty remarks, little reveals in front of mutual friends. I watched carefully. The more she flaunted, the more visible her guilt became. Even he, caught in her web, couldn't hide it forever. One evening at a small gathering with the lakeside crew, Morgan leaned close to me under the guise of friendliness, whispering, "You should really let it go, Kara. He's just confused." I smiled politely and something inside me shifted. The same dismissive tone she had always used against me now carried weightless charm, empty and exposed. I didn't respond. Silence, I realized, was my most powerful weapon. Every eye in the room caught the tension between us, and I could see subtle glances, questions forming in their minds. Later, Ethan pulled me aside, his hands fidgeted. "Kara, I don't like how things are going," he said quietly. Not an apology, not a confession, just the first cracks of honesty. He was beginning to realize that Morgan's narrative wasn't the full story. I said nothing, letting the pause stretch, letting him connect the dots himself. That's when I knew. I had initiated the collapse without a single confrontation. Morgan, oblivious, continued with her pattern, talking, smiling, controlling narratives, thinking she was untouchable. Every move she made, I had anticipated. Every time she tried to charm friends into her version of reality, I had a silent countermeasure. I didn't need to accuse, I just needed to remain steady, calm, and patient. Let her arrogance build, let her confidence swell, and then let it crash. By the end of the night, I had mapped the next steps. I knew when and where her social and professional vulnerabilities would be most exposed. I knew Ethan was already questioning her loyalty, and I knew Morgan, in her obsession with appearing untouchable, had left a perfect trail of proof I could now use at the exact right moment. As I walked home, the city lights reflecting in puddles from the evening rain, I felt a strange satisfaction. Not gloating, not relief, just clarity. Morgan had underestimated me. She had assumed silence and trust equaled weakness. She had assumed I would break, but I hadn't. I was ready. And soon, very soon, the carefully constructed life she thought she had built on my heartbreak would come undone, piece by piece, and with precision. By midweek, something had shifted in the Lakeside crew. Though no one named it outright, conversations tightened, glances lingered, and I stayed exactly where I needed to be, steady, quiet, unreadable. I didn't push for attention. I didn't correct the narrative. I let it settle on its own weight. Morgan's confidence, unchecked, was doing most of the work for me. Ethan changed first. Not dramatically, just enough to notice. Shorter replies, less warmth, a careful distance around Morgan that hadn't been there before. I tracked it without comment. Every hesitation, every avoided look, every fracture in their ease became another confirmed piece in something already taking shape. I moved on to structure next. Not emotion. My lawyer had everything. Timeline, messages, receipts, notes, photos. Organized, cross-referenced, ready. The advice was simple. Wait until it cannot be disputed, then end it cleanly. No noise, no gaps. Morgan, sensing none of this, escalated. She grew more visible with Ethan, more deliberate in how she positioned herself in conversations, more certain in her tone when my name came up. It wasn't subtle anymore. It was pressure disguised as confidence. I didn't resist it. I let it pass through, noted it, and stored it. At the same time, I began seeding small fractures into the wider circle. Nothing direct, just remarks, half-observations, carefully placed questions about timing, consistency, honesty. Enough to make people pause later, not enough to trace back to me. Then Ethan started talking. Not confession, drift. Small corrections in his own version of events. Slips that didn't feel intentional, just unavoidable. Enough to confirm what I already knew. Morgan's control over him was loosening. I didn't challenge him. I just let the information settle and moved it into place. That night, everything came together in one pass. Messages, notes, photos, timelines, inconsistencies, no longer fragments, but a single structure. Not emotional proof, mechanical proof. Stable enough to hold under pressure. Morgan had built something, assuming I would stay reactive. I hadn't been reactive in a long time. By the weekend, I chose the point of impact. Not where it would hurt most emotionally, but where it would be undeniable socially. Visibility mattered more than confrontation. Once the structure failed in public, there would be nowhere for it to stand in private. Ethan was already halfway out of her orbit without realizing it. Morgan was still operating as if nothing had shifted. That imbalance was the opening, and for the first time in weeks there was no noise in my mind about it. No anger, no doubt, no urgency, just timing. She thought she had been managing people. I had been mapping outcomes, and those are not the same thing at all. The night of the Harper Media Group Gala arrived like a storm I had been quietly brewing. The chandeliers reflected off polished marble floors, the room buzzing with chatter, laughter, and clinking glasses. Morgan was radiant, flawless, fully confident, gliding through the crowd with Ethan by her side, arms casually linked, smiles perfectly synchronized. She had no idea the trap had already been laid. I arrived later, calm, collected, blending seamlessly into the crowd. I didn't need a dramatic entrance. The moment wasn't about spectacle, it was about precision. I watched from a distance as she circulated, subtly flaunting what she thought was untouchable control. Every laugh, every whispered comment to friends, every seemingly innocent glance at me was a testament to her arrogance. And every one of those moves was documented. Every one of those moments would become evidence. I made my way to a group of mutual friends, casually dropping small cues. I was surprised Ethan never mentioned the concert tickets he got. I said, voice light, eyes steady. Must have slipped his mind? Morgan tensed, a flicker of doubt crossing her perfect smile. She tried to laugh it off, but it was too late. The seeds of suspicion had been planted. Then, carefully, I let a mutual friend overhear a piece of the truth. It's strange how some plans just appear out of nowhere, I murmured, letting my tone imply knowledge without accusation. Heads turned subtly. Eyes shifted. Questions began to form organically. Morgan's control over the narrative, the social power she'd relied on for months, began to fracture right there on the marble floor. Ethan, visible in his discomfort, tried to maintain his composure, but I could see it, the tension, the cracks, the guilt. He was starting to pull away from her, even unconsciously. Morgan's perfect mask faltered. The first whispers of betrayal rippled through the crowd. Finally, the moment arrived. I stood near the center of the room as Morgan approached, attempting charm and dismissal. "You're making it weird," she said. Her usual line meant to belittle me. I smiled, steady, and let the silence speak. A waiter dropped a tray of envelopes near me. All the documented evidence I had collected over months, arranged for presentation to the people who mattered. Mutual friends, social contacts, and even Ethan himself. Eyes widened. Murmurs spread. Morgan's laughter faltered. The notes, tickets, photos, and screenshots revealed a pattern she could no longer deny. Each item was a piece of the puzzle, and every glance she threw my way reflected panic and disbelief. Ethan stepped back, stepping closer to me, and in that subtle shift, Morgan realized she had lost him too. Her empire of influence collapsed in real time. Friends who had once defended her hesitated, whispered to each other, and began to question everything. The affair partner who had been her shield became her weakness. She tried bargaining, flustered, words spilling. "It's not what you think. Kara, you don't understand." But no one listened. My silence, calm and precise, spoke louder than her desperate pleas. By the time she finally left the room, alone, flustered, and exposed, the social and professional fallout had already taken root. Morgan had lost control, credibility, and influence, all in one calculated evening. And I remained steady, unshaken, victorious, without a word. The days after the gala didn't erupt. They dissolved. Nothing changed loudly. It was worse than that. Things simply stopped responding the way they used to. Morgan's messages arrived first, still polished, still confident in tone. Then the gaps between them widened. Then they stopped receiving replies at all. In group chats, she kept trying to anchor conversations, dropping familiar jokes and references that used to guarantee attention. Now they landed late, or not at all. Someone would react a few hours later with something neutral, as if they were reading a message from a stranger rather than from a central voice in the group. Ethan was no longer orbiting her in any visible way. At first, it was subtle, missing from the same conversations, no longer looping her into plans. Then it became obvious he simply stopped placing her at the center of anything. Not out of anger, out of separation. Morgan tried to correct it. She reached out privately, reshaping the story in fragments. Misunderstanding, exaggeration, stress taken out of context. But the replies she received no longer mirrored her tone. People were careful now. Measured, unsure in a way they hadn't been before. The gala had done something irreversible. It hadn't convinced anyone of a single version of events. It had broken certainty itself. And without certainty, her influence had nowhere to attach. Ethan eventually reached me once more. It wasn't dramatic, no apology rehearsed for impact, just a quiet acknowledgement of distance that had already formed. "I can see it now," he said. "I didn't before. That's all." There was nothing to fix in his words. Only confirmation that the structure she built around perception had finally failed. Morgan's presence in the social circle didn't collapse in one moment. It thinned. Invitations stopped including her name automatically. Conversations no longer paused when she entered. The space she used to occupy so easily stayed empty a fraction longer each time, until people stopped expecting her to fill it at all. And when she tried to step back in, she no longer interrupted a narrative. She interrupted silence. That was the difference. I didn't need to respond to any of it. Not anymore. What mattered had already shifted before I ever spoke. And in the end, there was no final confrontation, no defining exchange, just a simple realization settling across everything she had built. Influence doesn't disappear when challenged. It disappears when people stop reinforcing it.